Hi everybody, thank you so much for attending today's BUA Dialogues. Please make your way into the venue as we will be beginning in 5 minutes. Hello? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing. Pardon? Yes, I'll let you know. But so if you go out, turn to the right. So come with me. Out to your right. Test, test. I'm out. Yes, test 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2. Okay. Trey, we're good? Thank you, everybody. Can you please take your seats? We're just about to begin now. That's perfect. I think when the room goes silent, you always know that that's the time that we're about to begin. Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's dialogue series, REA BUA, as we interrogate her story, looking at the intersections of race, gender, and the political economy of South Africa. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today at the Argyle and who's in the room, and to everybody who's also joining us via the live stream. In terms of house rules, if you need the bathroom, you'll exit and go to the right. The bathroom is located behind the stage. There's sanitizing stations right here in the room, at the courtyard, at the food station. And if you need to smoke, the smoking will be in the courtyard at the stairs. If everybody could please keep your masks on unless you are currently speaking on the stage. Please turn your phones to silent so they don't disrupt the speakers on stage. And if you need any technical requirements, please speak to Trayvon at the back, pronouns they, them. Thank you. Today, as we link poetry, art, film, and music and dialogue, we interrogate the vestiges of the apartheid legacy in our political economy today. We do so particularly reflecting on the rich, complex, and profound legacy of Umama Nomzamo Winnie Madikizela Mandela. And we also, in turn, recognize the many defiant women like her who have been subject to repeated exclusion and erasure. The apartheid political economy was built on the exclusion of black women, and their work was deliberately constrained to care work in professions such as nursing and social work. We know that Umama was the first medical social worker, and we know that that is something that often gets overlooked or is misrecognized and misunderstood. And today we seek to locate that as the first site of inquiry as we look at the many generations of defiant women who've been subject to exclusion and erasure. And in order to do so, I'd like to invite the CEO of Tekano, Lebo Ramafoko, who will be in conversation with Tekano's board chair, Dr. Tracy Naledi. Thank you.
My aunt, Meiki Dora Mogapi, was a teacher in a 2-roomed farm school in Hartbeespoort. Despite the limited resources in the school, my aunt ran it with excellence, and all the firstborn children of her siblings started in that school because she believed that nobody was able to teach us in the manner that she did. She was a marvel to watch. She believed in education. She believed in excellence. She was also a single parent to a boy, and although he grew into a very tall man, she was the disciplinarian, and you dare not cross her. I look at my life right now, my value for what is right, my value and love for education, my value for working with those that are mostly marginalized. And I realized that my aunt, Dora Meiki Mogapi, multiplied in me. I think of the many times we would catch a lift in big trucks because there was no public transport from Manseville to Hartbeespoort, and how she would put herself and her life in danger those many times just to make sure that a black child gets an education. I think of so many young men and women who, despite their bleak circumstances, she inspired to find value in their lives, to make sure that everything that they do, they did excellently. And each time I look at my own insistence that everything done should be of excellence, I realize that I learned from the best, and that who I am is because she was. I truly stand on the shoulders of a giant. She did not die. She multiplied. My aunt.
I share the story of my aunt because I think if we are going to be a leadership development project, we need to recognize on whose shoulders we stand. Because in all of our lives, there is a domestic worker, there is a farm worker, there is a single mother, there is a woman who brought us to where we are. And no matter where I sit and where I stand, I recognize myself as the girl from Manseville. Because when I think of the history of my own helper, who at the age of 13 had to leave school and work on the farm that her parents lived in, I realized that I wouldn't have been who I am had she not left her own 11-year-old to come and look after my 11-year-old, so that I could become the woman that is sitting here today. So for me, it is very important that when we start, we don't only speak about she multiplied, we do not only speak about her story from an abstract point, but we personalize it. And I think for every woman and every man and every person sitting in this room, there is a woman or many women on whose shoulders we stand, but whose stories we do not tell. And it is for that reason that I feel very passionate about this project, but I also feel very passionate that especially for a woman like Mama Winnie, whose own story, whose own agency was distorted because patriarchy cannot exist alongside the power of women, that when we look at ourselves at leadership, we locate our own struggles, our own history within the history of those that passed before us. And it also gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tracy Naledi, who is our chairperson, who is going to tell us a little bit about Tekano and why this particular critical dialogue series is important for Tekano. Over to you, Sis Tracy, and welcome and thank you for joining us.
So, good morning, everybody. Nake nongayana Tracy Don, ndodagazi ga baphelile no Lika Dlamini, isizukulu samazizi, ngwetsi yabatswana, batlhaping, batswa kwa Kurumane. You know, I am so pleased to be here and so honored to have this opportunity to share with you where this whole journey started. And you know, what Auslebo is saying is so true, that we really stand on the shoulders of giants. And I feel now compelled to share my story first. I can't now not share the people that have multiplied in me. As Auslebo was saying, all of us have a domestic worker in our lives. Mine was my grandmother, my mom's mom, who, like many domestic workers then, all her 3 children, my mom is the firstborn. She literally, as you know then, there was no maternity leave, nothing. She fell pregnant as Lungwini, Emakishini, and would go to the rural areas, Soputukwana, just outside Hammanskraal, to give birth to her 3 children. And all of them, she left with extended family to go and work so that Abo Mama could have an opportunity to go to school. And because of her sacrifices, my mom became a teacher. And I always say that my mom is also one of my I'm the person that I am, the drive that I have to work as hard as I do, to do all that I do is from my mom, because I've seen her work hard to pull herself out of poverty through education. Today, I'm a medical doctor, I'm a public health physician, I have had an incredible career in public health, and now I'm the deputy dean at UCT, Faculty of Health Sciences. You know, I'm a UCT graduate. I did both my undergrad and postgraduate at UCT. And, you know, our deanery office is up a spiral stair. And never did I imagine that I would be occupying those spaces up in those spiral stairs. It really happened by accident. But as you say, you know, you never know, you know, where the universe wants you to be. So like Auslebo, like many of us here, like many listening, we are who we are because of the women that have given birth to us, because of the women that have sacrificed so much for us. And so I thank all of them, and I really thank you, Auslebo, for leading by example, telling us it's okay to share our stories and, you know, and to be who we are. So, to do my job. Thank you very much for allowing me that opportunity to share my story. It's one of the things that so beautiful, because when you share your story, you almost share a piece of you and you allow the world to see you. So thank you. I appreciate that space. So where did Tekano start? So Atlantic Philanthropies was, and I say was because it no longer exists. It was an NGO that was started a long time ago. There was this man called Chuck Feeney, and he was a rich businessman, had lots of money as a billionaire, and he decided that really it did not serve him to just keep all of this money, and he wanted to give it away. And his view and his vision was that he wanted to give it all away before he died, okay? And so he started, and when he started, he was still working in his business, and he gave up all the shares of his company to Atlantic Philanthropies, which was an NGO that funded a whole lot of kind of social justice, health, and democracy initiatives. In South Africa, Atlantic Philanthropies came into South Africa soon after, after 1994, and they've contributed to many initiatives around building out democracy, within health, within social justice. So in 2015 or so, Atlantic Philanthropies still had money left, and Chuck Finney was like, guys, my time on this earth is coming to an end. Can you please make my vision true that I can give away all of this money before I die? And then the Atlantic Philanthropies executives went and consulted a whole lot of their previous grantees to say, how do we create a lasting legacy that this money that is left will actually ensure that Chuck Finney's vision of giving while living actually becomes true, but in fact multiplies. Mm-hmm. So they had given a lot of funding to create institutions, to do a whole lot of different things, but they wanted something different that would really be a lasting legacy. And so what we're doing today is very connected with that story, because it's very much about linking the past, the present, and the future. And so in 2016, there was a consultation of about 30 or so professionals in South Africa. There were multiple consultations around the world. In South Africa in particular, there was a consultation that about 30 or so of us were called to a meeting over 2 days, just really brainstorming of what a legacy could look like. That was very much on the premise of some of the principles that Chuck Finney believed in. And after that, the 2-day kind of workshop, 5 of us were invited to the Atlantic Philanthropy Board to come and start the conversation about what that could look like in South Africa. What then happened is that the 5 of us, it was myself, it was Professor Mvuyo Tom, it was Professor David Sanders, Professor Steve Reed, and Professor Letitia Rispel. All of us are public health practitioners, doctors, and nurses in that. So all of us come from a particular world view, and all of us as public health practitioners were very much aware that health is more than just a biomedical model. It's more than that social determinants of health truly drive health and well-being. And that health is very much a social justice issue, which quite frankly, as health practitioners, we are not taught that. We are taught very much about how health is about bugs and about the biomedical things, and very little about all those other structural determinants of health, particularly race, gender, and class. Okay. And as a public health, I'm a public health specialist, and this is what I've learned. I've been doing this for 2 decades, and it's something that I've had to learn as I have been working, okay? Which speaks now in my other hat as now the Deputy Dean in Health Services, really about the curriculum that we teach to our students, even on the health sector, about what it is that health is and what it is that is about. So the 5 of us then were at the time a steering committee, and we had 3 colleagues that were working with us to do the research for us and to do the writing for us. And we were driving the kind of how the strategy of what we could do together. Ultimately, we put together a proposal, and can I just say, our proposal, are you listening? Our proposal was what got approval first time. There was no comeback, there was no whatever, first time. Which was actually a shock for us, because we still thought we had another 3 months. And so we were told, oh yes, thank you very much for a proposal. It's been approved. And all of us, I was like, ah! Now we have to set up an institution. So we set up Tekano in January 2017, like from scratch. We were literally at the offices in Isiviva and I had like plastic chairs, like it was yo, guys, from scratch, nothing. And as part of the setup of Tekano, there were other Atlantic Fellows programs that were set up around the world. So all of us were set up around this philosophy, as I said, that health is a social justice issue. So there are 7 other projects around the world, and all of us look at health equity from a slightly different perspective. And within South Africa, we had developed this project very much around social and structural determinants of health, and we had, in terms of our profile of the people that are in our program, we really were interested in working with social justice actors, social justice activists. We wanted to work alongside people who were already in the trenches, people who were already working, people who needed just support and assistance and connection and skills to be able to amplify all their work. So we set up our project, and September 2017, actually it was the 9th of September 2017 when we had our first cohort in Maru. Oh my goodness, it's 4 years. And when I was looking at the time, I was like, oh my word, it's actually 4 years since we started on this journey. And we were the cradle of humankind and had a fantastic time with our inaugural cohort. And really, in terms of the vision that we have co-created around what we would like Tekano to be about is, as I said, firstly, to understand that health is a social justice issue. That number 2, we want our fellows to be confident. Confidence. But confidence that's based on values, on ethics, okay? We don't want our fellows to be those people who are like brown envelope. We are very cognizant that in our country we need a new type of leader, a type of leader that is not self-centered, thinking about their own advancement, thinking about what they can get from whatever it is that they're doing. We want a leader that is confident in the values that drive them, that leader that understands that I am a leader of people, right? I'm a leader of people I serve. People don't serve me, I serve them. Okay? And we want our fellows to be confident and to be competent. When one of our fellows stands here and speaks, Nizabezwa, bazokhuluma. Shem. And their confidence and competence is based not just on brain cleverness. We want them to have the competence of the head. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to understand what the drivers of ill health is. We want them to understand what the drivers of inequity is. We want them to be innovative in thinking about innovative ways to be able, that are evidence-based, that are not evidence that's just in the journals, evidence that comes from people, evidence that comes from communities. Okay? We want them to be connected to those communities. We don't want them to be high flyers who are thinking about themselves. When you are there in that stage, or Oxford, wherever you are, remember where you come from. Remember who you are representing. Okay?
Yeah.
We want them to be competent in their hearts. You know, there is so much division. So much division in our country, in the world, where we all sit on our pedestals and we sit in our corners and we stand our ground and we don't find the middle ground. We want our fellows to be able to identify what are the things that we can agree on. What are the things that we can work together on? What are the things that can move us forward to achieve this very lofty agenda of us of equality? And it's not by accident that we are called Tekano. Tekano means equality. We were very intentional in choosing that word because that is our vision for a fairer and equal and inclusive society.
Yeah.
Okay? We want our fellows not just to be just nje, people who are flyers, we want them to use their hands. Basebenze. Be activists, go to communities and work with people. We want them to be connected to one another. We want them to be connected to the world, to be connected to all other actors. One of the things we know for sure is that we need a catalytic community. We cannot do this by ourselves. So we are very pleased to have this wide range of actors and people and poets and singers and writers and researchers who are here today to share with us. So Change Agents for Life, those are our fellows.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sis Tracy. I can't say Dr. Naledi now for formalities, so all protocols out of the room. I think for me, I just want to speak a little bit about today. And although this is normally done at the end of the day, I want to do it at the beginning. Because this is really has been a collaborative effort. And before I even start, I really want to pay homage to Mama Nora, who is in the room here with us today. Mama Nora is from Brantford, and you will see one of, in fact, two of the films that she is in, where she tells us that when the state security came and they basically dumped Winnie Mandela in Brantford, the community around, including domestic workers, were told that if they wanted to keep their jobs, they dare not speak to that communist. And she will tell her story in her own film. I'm not going to tell it. But to have you in our midst, Mama, it is such an honor and a privilege that you are here. And I'm sure wherever she is, Nomzamo is smiling on you because you carry her spirit with you in the room today. We also had a multitude of amazing filmmakers, young black women who brought so many amazing stories to life. And they will be introduced, you will see their stories. But one other person who told a story of her mother is Ketsi Ngobo, who just came in, who spoke about her mother, Loretta Ngobo, a woman that sadly I never knew about. And I remember when we read the proposal, I was like, Haibo, and how did it happen? That I think that I went to school and I'm educated and I don't know about Loretta. And I think that example typifies exactly what we even call education that has given us privilege. Because an education that does not teach you about yourself is not an education. So part of the journey, our own journey of leadership, is about unlearning. And I really feel extremely privileged that all of you honored our call in a very short space of time, poured your hearts out in marvelous, marvelous films that really are restoring the many, many stories that we have not been told about. I'm equally proud of our fellows, and I'm not going to speak about them because Sis Tracy has done. Because whenever you call, they basically answer. They are going to be facilitating these conversations. And one of the most amazing opportunities of being part of the Tekano group is the opportunity to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Because when you are in the midst of younger leaders, when you are in the midst of activists who are activists in spaces that did not exist. So everything, for an example, we know about LGBTIQ+, we are learning from young people. I remember I traveled with my son to Mexico about 3 or 4 years ago, and I don't know what I said, and they turned around to me and said, "Oh, but Mom, you are so binary." I was like, oh my goodness. Where's Auntie Google? Let me just check what binary means. And right now, I'm binarying left, right, and center. You know? But I think it also comes from our own acknowledgement that part of what we need to do is to recognize not only our positionality, but a lot of things that we've got to learn and unlearn. And this series is helping us to do that. And I really, really want to thank the Tekano team, the Tekano staff, who really, really worked hard to make sure that this project becomes a success. And although it is not good to always do that, I really want to single Bongani Maseko, who's our communications specialist. No task is too large for Bongani to work with us. And I also want to really single out Noted Men, the team that put this event together. We had so many chops and changes, and I know that some of our meetings were very hard, but look at us. We are here, we are looking good, and we really are going to have a day that is like no other. And lastly, not because they are list, I really want to acknowledge Gail Smith. It was such an honor and a privilege to work with you. You are a walking dictionary of feminist writings around Mama Winnie. And it was just such a pleasure to really leave this project in your hands. And it was so nice, and I'll tell you this, I haven't told Gail this. You know when you know that in meetings, you are the problematic woman, you are the one that cracks the whip, and somebody comes and they crack the whip. It was so nice. Sitting back and say, tell them, Gail, tell them. And I think that is how feminist sisterhood operates. It is the ability to lead, but also to be led at different. It is the opportunity and the ability to collaborate. I'm not going to waste time, but to also thank each and every one of you that are joining us, every other person that is joining online, to thank you for being here. This is inaugural. We are pleased for the journey that we have walked, and we really look forward to the panels. And let me thank all of the speakers that are here. We wrote to so many people, and everybody that could make it, the resounding response was, yes, I will be there. And we had two particular speakers that were supervised by Mamu Winnie, who we invited. And Thursday, what day is it today? I don't even remember names. Monday, I remember it's Wednesday. Monday, I got a call from Umamu Zanele Mbeki, who said, I should have been there, and I want to be there, but I'm not able to be there. But Winnie supervised me at Baragwanath. And when I got your invitation, I called Brigalia, and I said, Brigalia, before we die, there is a story we need to tell about our time as social workers under the supervision of Winnie Mandela, and she took no nonsense, and we had to be excellent, and we know that we are the women that we are because of Winnie Mandela. And she said to me, when I spoke to Brigalia, and Brigalia said, oh, I also have that young girl's letter who's asked me to come. I said to Brigalia, we better do it. And she called me and she said, can we do it after the event? And I said, with all pleasure. So it gives me great pride that we are going to bring so many voices under the banner of Tekano to tell incredible stories that patriarchy made sure we do not see, we do not tell. And this is our small offering to do right for a woman that lost everything and more. Thank you.
Shoo, can we just take a moment to reflect on that power? Because I feel like when you are in a room of feminist community, there's just another kind of power that makes you feel like you can truly take on everything that we need to confront, everything that we need to tackle, everything that we need to take on. And I'd just like to acknowledge that what a gift it is to be in a multi-generational room. We truly stand on the shoulders of giants, and especially the kind of giants who were on the stage right now and the kind of giants who are in the room today. And that's something I find myself reflecting on right now. The importance of what they said about not abstracting, not just theorizing, but personalizing these important stories that we are going to tell today. In my day-to-day life, I'm a culture editor at a site called New Frame, a social justice news site. And in my day-to-day work, I witness the power of storytelling all the time. The power of stories not only just to be told, but to complicate the narrative, to encode the narrative, to change the narrative, to revisit and to redo. And I think that that's the spirit of today as we learn, unlearn, relearn. And I love that formulation because I think the relearning is critical. And we are part of that change that is driving forward what new stories are going to look like. And as a culture editor, it's also such an honor to witness the power of culture to do that work. And as part of today's proceedings, Tekano has commissioned a series of short films that re-look at Mamwini's legacy, at the legacy of a new kind of health equity. And we're just about to see the first one of these that is called Loretta and They Did Not Die, directed by Zeketiwe Ngobo of Fusebox. This will be followed by our first panel, which is titled Black Women, Erasure, Resistance and Persistence, moderated by Tekano Lifelong Fellow Hasina Majid, and featuring two brilliant and critical feminist historians who are part of a new generation of scholars, Dr. Atambile Masola and Zikona Valela. Thank you very much.
Loretta Ngobo is a writer, a feminist, an author, a politician, but most of all, she's been the most amazing mother to me.
I think Sister Loretta is my hero because she did things her way.
Whatever she wanted, whether it was going to Fort Hare, when no one in her district had ever been to university.
She was always seeking to bring others along on this journey of hers, of finding her voice and making that voice count.
She went on to teach in the University of London. She took up women's issues. She did writing.
She would have been sad if people shied away from having their voices heard, because everybody has got a story to tell.
In Zulu, when we want to authenticate your origin, we ask a question, Iphi igaba yakho? Where is your navel? My navel is just down there.
What I write about are things that have happened, that I'm aware have happened. In recording my own reactions to them, I am also recording history. Although my great-grandmother was a poet, none of my family are poets. The only one who is poetic in her approach, I know she took it from my great-grandmother, is my sister.
Isiphiwo sikanaka zabantu sokuba poetic nokuba good in writing sasuka emncane, kanti ufuze ukhokho wethu, ngisho mina ukhokho wami uMamgidla wayethi ke mangabe ezwa ubuhlungu bokwaliwa engasana kwangayile ndoda yayimlande ngaphesheya kothukela, ayibongela intombi yakhe yokuqala enesiphiwo sokubongela, athi qomisa amaqele nogikidi mhlawusingaphi basibeke ezicwayeni njengensonyama, kakuyilutho kwenencubeni, kuyinkukhu yodwa onengazinto. Kazi ngiyawuzibika kubani, ngiyawuzibika kungangaza kwabakacele.
We go into story to be changed by it. We go into story to be healed by it. We go into story to shift our thinking, our perspective of who we are. We never come out of story the same way.
My literary background, if I was to speak widely, was from the traditional stories that our parents taught us. As I later learned, the children I was teaching, if a child wasn't making much move in writing or things like that, I concentrated on the story side of things and found that they soon sharpen. Our minds are related to storytelling.
Inganekwane, intomi, ditsumo, you know, those were used to educate children.
Stories were not just being told because you just want to tell a story. There was always a lesson embedded in there. Teaches you, yes, about your sense of identity, teaches you about your sense of belonging, and also the fact that you matter.
My parents, who were in the rural areas, they didn't have a big cupboard of books, but they had boxes of books. My sister and I realized that whenever our parents were talking and they didn't want us to hear what they were saying, they would speak in English. We began to see the connection between the box and the language they were using in the house. And we got interested ourselves. We began to read. We began to take a lot of interest in what was the written word and what secrets it could hold.
Ngoba ugogo wethu wafunda e-Inanda Seminary kuse uMrs Edwards umuntu oqala waqala i-Inanda Seminary. Ugogo wafunda waze wafika ku-standard 2. Kangokuthi she would talk a lot of English, trying to jump over my head. Beautiful adjective of a quality thing.
Education was fundamental in my grandfather's family, and it became fundamental in my own family. When my mother met another teacher, she was already a teacher herself.
Wathi mawudadewethu pasuse 7 wamthatha wam-aplayela e-Inanda Seminary. Wathi sesenanda wasuka uMiss Blansam, a missionary lady eyayisenanda, wabhalela uma wathi ngicela ukumfundisa mina ngemali yami. Mina ngizobhadala yonke imali yesikole.
She was head prefect of the whole seminary. She was the head of the debate. We knew that Inanda was going to be number 1 because of Loretta. English was her mother tongue.
And when I got to Fort Hare, I was so excited by the thinking. At the time, Fort Hare was really powerful. It got us all to open our eyes as to what we were doing and what was happening to us, what was happening to the country, what power we had to change things. Almost every night there was some association meeting. And I went and listened and just drank all this knowledge and this wisdom, this new insight. Mm-hmm. I got my political education at Fort Hare. Unfortunately, as a young student at Fort Hare, I was almost discouraged, in the art of writing, because at the time when I went to Fort Hare, there were only 38 girls at Fort Hare. And when I say 38, I mean from the whole country and all the African states. No matter how much effort you put into what you thought was right, the professors seemed a lot more interested in male students. This prepared me for a situation where I was discouraged from writing. I didn't think anybody really would be interested in hearing what I had to say.
When my mother left Fort Hare in 1953 and went on to do a diploma, she became more involved in the resistance of the apartheid regime. In 1956, she was one of the many women who marched to the Union buildings.
Our politics have always undermined women. We were really onlookers and the cheering party. It was not until about the mid-50s that women were, I will call it, assaulted by the government. They began to rethink the position of not giving women the passes. That's when women now began to meet. Although, I have written about the rural women who still surprise me to this day, how more or less on their own fought so hard against the passes in the rural areas throughout the late 50s.
Mum was raided when I was an infant by the police. I don't think they were even that clear about what specifically they were looking for, but I think Mum knew, and I think it was within hand, so she picked me up, took that document, shoved it into my nappy, hoping that I wouldn't do anything untoward. And then she pinched me. I began to cry. And then she was rocking me as they're looking all over for this information. But it was already sort of in safekeeping on my bottom.
The security forces came and were ready to arrest her. So she left South Africa in 1963 on the 22nd of May. She went into exile.
The reason why I came into exile was because I didn't want to leave my children and go to prison like my husband. The English climate provided me with the space to write. I had lived through South Africa through so much fear. England is just the right place for me. They leave me alone. When it's dark, I close the door and there's peace outside. It's quiet and my children grow up inside.
ngagqiba okunye kwakupolitical ngagqiba phansi komthi ngaphuma ngahamba okunye ngangikushisa naseSwazini okunye ngakushisa naseZambia okunye ngakushisa ngize ngayoqala ukubhala into engangingayishisi noma ibheda kanjani ngoba ekuqaleni kwami ukubhala ngangibhala out of the heat from inside ngibhale kubeke lapha. Next time kuthi angibhale angizuxhuma lapha kade ngibhala khona. Ngixhuma lapho umqondo wami kungiyise khona. Ngibhale futhi ngibhale kubushiye. So my first book, Cross of Gold, is a combination of a lot of writings that I did at a time when I couldn't accept that I could write a book. Incwadi yami mina ukuze iyofika ku-publisher ngangimjwayele uMargaret Licham ngifike eNgilandi, and she was the only person that I talked about my book, about my writing. And then she says to me one day, Loretta, I would like to see what you've written. I said, I can't give you what I've written because it doesn't make sense to anybody else, and so on and so forth and so on. I give it to her. After about 2 to 3 weeks, I get a letter from Longman. We've received your manuscript from Margaret Licham. And to my shock, I phone her, what have you gone and done? She laughs and she says, yes, I thought it was worth something. A good editor could put it together. So we started working on it.
Feminism is what I found in England. At first, it kind of jolted me. I was being attacked by feminists. Right through this book, women are not free. Feminists were not happy. The psyche in me told me that women could not go far. I've had a struggle, which fortunately the feminist experience in England helped me overcome.
So she was really, I think, acutely aware through her own experience of how Black women are made invisible as producers of knowledge. So she provides this platform with Let It Be Told. And that is what is so incredible about her, that she was a writer for other writers.
So I think that's something that a lot of the newer writers take for granted. They don't know the struggles that your mother had to go through. I was really very engaged by the fact that she had that anthology, Let It Be Told. That was showcasing Black British women writers in essays. So that was an important landmark to me. And the fact that your mother did that was an important indication of how she saw the importance of getting Black women's voices out there.
But there was a book that I'd always known I would write. A story of women who had brought me up. The story of my life, my childhood, of the life of migration, people leaving the rural areas to go and work in the cities. what life meant to me as a child in that rural part of South Africa. And that's why there's a lot of that in And They Didn't Die.
When we see, for example, a writer like Alan Paton, who writes about the same community in Cry the Beloved Country, he has one African woman, Ma Khumalo, and the only line he writes about her is she stood at the window with bovine eyes, mute with the suffering of oxen. That is African women in the imagination of a white liberal. That is the tradition that she enters into, Mrs. Noble, and writes these rich, fully agentic lives for these women. They are mothers, they are wives, they are sexual. In short, what she does is she confers full humanity and dignity to women who have been looked at as objects.
But I was not free myself at the time. Even while I wanted to write this book, even while I started to write this book, I think my own liberation came through this book.
I just wanted to take a moment to just say, Ketiwe, please stand, so that we can just salute you and honor you for that film. And Palesa, please. I don't know how much more excited I can get about today. As it goes on and on, I just get more and more excited about what we're doing, what we're making, what we're building in this space. I'd like to invite the speakers to the stage, and just to note that they will be joined by Sipho Mtati, who will be joining us via video link.
Oh, where is your navel? And watching this brings a power inside of you that makes you shake. Not a nervous shake, but a shake of pride, and a shake that can invoke so much of emotion that you'd want to just sob. And when we speak about the navel, it's the source of life. It's where your umbilical cord connects. And there's cultural talks around the importance of the navel and the importance of the umbilical cord, and how even though the physical one may deteriorate in time, the invisible one is what drags us through life. And what our mothers pass through us, besides the actual nourishment from food, is the power of their thought and the power of their spirit and the strength imprinted in their DNA that shapes us. And every one of us has been born of that mother. And that navel is what holds us where we are and where we wish to be. No matter how far that cord may stretch, it always came from one source, the source of a woman. And welcome to our panelists. And I'm so glad that you're here. And Sipho online, how are you?
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. I don't ever like to introduce people because I always believe we all have our way of identifying with ourselves. So I'll give you a brief second to introduce yourself, your name and what you stand for, and then we can take the discussion further. We'll start with Sipo online.
Hi, can you hear me? Yay. So, I'm Sipo Mtati. My relationship with Tekano is that I'm the chair of the board program committee. But as a human being, I'm a feminist who's been moving around for many, many years in the social justice space. With many of you in the room. I do not like introductions, so that's really who I am. A feminist who is so excited right now to be with you all, even virtually.
Thank you, Sipo. Please take the floor.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kona Valela. I'm from a little town called Onge, which was before then called King William's Town, and before then Onge. I'm a historian, and I think I'll just leave it there. I don't like to talk too much about myself.
So Africa needs to always say her story. Otherwise, she will always be spoken for. And in Loretta's story, it becomes very important that we start to identify the fundamental importance about how we document our stories. And document it in such a way that nobody can take that away from us through narratives imposed upon us. And that's the challenge we face, even in research, when we try to bring solutions to Africa, but we have to quote European interventions. And we start to diminish our own value and our own capacity and our own ability to solve our own problems. And then you look at the people like Mam Loretta, who in her own way and in a giant way found a way to solve problems her own way. And she used the resources of people strategically placed to oppress her to find that liberation to write. And I want to bring it to the panelists. What did the story invoke for you in terms of the themes that came out from it, what it meant then, and what it means today in 2021? So we have a time limit of 5 minutes per speaker, but if you can bring forward what it meant for you, the feelings that it invoked, and the themes that came out, what was it then and what is it now? Shall we start with you?
Thanks. So it was so moving for me to see that, because the last time I spoke to Ketiwe, she was so generous, because we were chatting about her mom's legacy and we were talking about how we were going to write it for a children's book. So to see that story and to hear Mama's voice, because I've never actually heard her voice. And it's one thing to read And They Didn't Die, and it's one thing to read Cross of Gold and then to write about it, because that's, an intellectual project that we have to do. But it's one thing to hear her voice and to hear her tell her own story. And I think for me, Mam Loretta is one of those people who was so clear. I think Barbara mentioned it as well in the clip. She knew that if she didn't do it, no one would do it. So, and I think she's the example of many other black women who have done the exact same thing as far back as the 1800s, who knew that if they didn't tell their story, if they didn't write, no one else would do it for them. And another wonderful example is someone like Mam Ellen Kuzwayo, who's also aware that if I don't tell other women's stories, no one is going to do it. So when you look at Call Me Women, she includes the names of other black women. So for me to know about Ellen Pumlangozwana, it is through Mam Ellen Kuzwayo, because it was her teacher and she felt the need to write about her teachers. In order for me to know about Mam Frida Matthews, it is through Mam Ellen Kuzwayo's writing about what Mam Frida Matthews meant to her as her teacher. So that's the powerful thing, is that when black women write, they liberate everyone. It's not an individualistic sort of navel-gazing project, but it's very much a healing project, I think. And it's about calling other women's names, and it's about placing themselves within a lineage and placing themselves within a community. And it's that matrilineal work where, from the Eastern Cape, kuthiwa masizithuthe. And often, xa uzithutha, which is to fetch yourself. You don't know to fetch yourself, okay? I'll go with that one. We often, you start with your father's surname. So when I introduce myself, I'll say, and maybe, now I've started saying, ozalwa ngumambele. And I think that's the tension with when women write, is that it's constantly bringing in that matrilineal line, because we know it's always precarious and it's always in a position of disappearing because it's not important.
I think in addition, watching that video confirmed a couple of things for me. That sometimes erasure is not necessarily a plot, and that it is sometimes an act of survival. So the moments where she talks about burning her own writing, those are moments, thinking of the context, those are moments of survival. I think Nomboniso Gasa writes about it also in an article, Remembering Chrisani. And she talks about how letters from Chris to, Utabawo or his mom, would have to be destroyed, because that would be evidence that would be used, to kind of dismantle the struggle. So it's not always this, we are going to get rid of the women type of thing, but it's also, and I think we need to kind of hold space for what that kind of thing means. Also, I am interested as well in bringing into the conversation, I think even in the work that I do, of the women who were not women of letters. Because I do think that in this moment, in our time, there is the commemorations that are coming up that are kind of unearthing the stories and the narratives of your Maxekes and of the Ngobos. But what of the contemporaries that did not write? And this is why I am interested in Winnie Mandela, because she does not write, but she uses a different kind of vocabulary captured through her aesthetic. So that's why, and that's why, for example, when I think of Maxeke, who existed existed even in the early 20th century, why do we not talk about Nonteta Bungu, who started the first, black woman prophetess who started a church that still exists to this day? And also, the fact that when she was incarcerated, she's incarcerated around the time of the Bullhook massacre. So we know of Enoch Mkijima, who was sent to the mines to do hard labor. But there's this woman who's then committed to a mental asylum. So I'm interested then in the ways in which these women that subvert in the ways that people like Nondeta and Winnie did,
are rendered unstable. Because you did not put her you didn't throw her in jail. Right? And in Winnie's case, you threw her in jail, you put her in solitary confinement, you banned her, you banished her, you put her under house arrest, and many other things that a lot of people didn't go through, but you also had to do the act of rendering this person unstable. Through your propagandists like your Chris Saunders and what was also, we need to think about in remembering someone like Winnie, in remembering someone like Umamungobo, we also have to remember the machinery that produced them. And we don't say against these women who responded to the machinery. We never say, remember there was a Chris Saunders. In order for there to be a Winnie, there had to be a Major Swanepoel. Right? So that we are able to understand so that we are true to the context when we talk about her. When we talk about the violence, when we talk about the writing and what it's writing against, we need to know and unravel the against. Yeah, so those are the things that I'm kind of thinking through.
Thank you. Sipho, can you hear us?
We lost her.
Is Sipho Kazi online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello? You can hear me? Okay, great. All right, great. Thanks. So, I mean, thank you again, Tekano, for curating this amazing event. And so sorry I could not be there. So maybe just to kind of build on some of the threads and to kind of build it, bring it home for Tekano, because, the talk of erase has become a buzzword, right? By everybody. Everybody's like, we must fight erasure. And often, the danger it gets, reduced to kind of, an empty, depoliticized, meaningless concept. And so what really kind of triggered me about, not, about the movie, but also the conversation, by my colleagues before me, is just how deep and damaging this process of erasure is, and how systemic and I would argue deliberate, right, and how important, because we are Tekano and we have to kind of make this relevant to us, how important it is that we make the link between erasure, its effects, and the kind of outcomes, including inequity, because of course erasure is about patriarchy and what it needs in order to reproduce itself as a system of domination. It is about racial capitalism and what it needs to reproduce itself. And how necessary erasure was, not just to kind of the white machinery of apartheid, but also to the Black nationalist, patriarchs who needed Black women for the labor that they can, the social reproductive labor that they can, offer, but needed to then kind of, write them out of the script when the story of liberation is being told. And importantly for me, how this pattern has continued, and the insidious ways in which the kind of development path we took post apartheid or into the kind of democratic era was a continuation of this strategy where Black women in particular, whether it's Winnie Mandela, who will valorize when it suits us and then will rubbish, when it suits patriarchy's interests, or the ordinary women, who were the soldiers really that kept society going. And then when we had the power, when liberation was won, we just continued, the kind of writing out of the script, adopting policies that made it, that the interests, of these, Black women bodies would not really feature in the ways that it needed to feature in terms of how we reimagined the post-apartheid society, and that today we are still fighting these struggles, that Mam Loretta and, the other women who wrote, but also, the women who were the kind of, beacons of resistance from, the big ones and the big names, the Winnies, to ordinary women, who, kept the resistance going. And so for me, this, I think Mam Loretta's words are really triggering about, the condition we are in and how it really isn't like an accident of history, and how important for, because this is, I'm a Tekano person, how important this conversation we're having is to what it is that Tekano is about. I mean, equity, is not an unfortunate byproduct of, history. It is about systemic decisions that are made about who belongs where, who is going to be located where in the queue of production, and who's going to be designated what roles and who's going to be designated what power. And so, it's for me, it's a really deep kind of and triggering, and I think invitation to why it is that we have to really kind of get a handle on this concept of erasure and not allow it to be depoliticized in some of the ways that it is. And to also kind of, prevent it from being kind of seen as being about reclaiming history, because as we know, it is in the moment. I mean, we are seeing erasure on steroids, right? Under these pandemic conditions where, who gets to speak, and whose story gets to be told by who, and who gets to be able to squeeze into this little technological screen, that we are now jostling to fit into because, we are living in a virtual world. And how dangerous, this moment is for the perpetuation of this kind of violence of erasure, and how critical it is that...
Sipokazi, sorry to cut you. We're running out of time, but thank you so much for your contribution in the space. I quickly want to round it up and bring it back to context matters. And when we speak about context that matters, people are political, every person is political, and the politics of the situations that we find ourselves in pushes us to put forward the messages that embolden us and the messages that put us out there to start speaking our stories and bringing in the stories of other people as we say it. But in the same space, the politics of spaces can also drive us to a point where our resistance and our persistence can burn us out. And erasure can have many faces. And one of the faces is the face of erasure when we ourselves reach a point in that drive to resist and that persistence and ongoing fire within us to say these stories and fight these battles where we set ourselves on fire. And one of the stories in Mam Loretta's story is when she said, I went to England and I could close my door and there was peace outside. And I think that if we just bring back to the context of where we are, all our stories are important and we should be writing them and speaking them and screaming them and singing them in whichever way we would pass those stories on, but we need to do it from a place of self-acceptance, but self-care and self-love. where we don't burn ourselves in the process of trying to say the story, because that's when our narratives can become hijacked and it's easily portrayed as she was a loose cannon. And she was trying to set fire to something that really wasn't there, and in the process, she burned herself. And so I would like to thank Mam Loretta, her family, the people that put this together, and our experts on our panel. Thank you so much for your input and your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Just more and more and more power is articulated on the stage here, and I think that's something that I'm really holding on to from that conversation, is this idea of bringing texture and nuance and complication to the idea of erasure. Our panelists brought us back to the idea of remembering the machinery, of thinking of different kinds of erasures that happen. And I think that's what excites me about being in this kind of space, is we're not having the easy conversations. We're not thinking in the binaries. We're thinking about the gray and the nuance and the texture and how even we ourselves can participate in our own erasure and often do so for very complicated reasons. So we're now about to have our second film, which is called Altered States Brandford, and it's helmed by Yumna Martin and Lesedi Mohwatle of Story. This will be followed by a panel discussion on social work and resistance, focusing on Brandford, which will be moderated by our BUA project manager and feminist writer, Gail Smith. And she'll be in conversation with Dumetse Motlwatse and Sisonke Msimang, who will join us via video link. Thank you.
Zulu yemfihlakalo Zulu yesimanga ezalise umhlabane.
In May 1977, you are informed that you have been banished. You will make your home in the Orange Free State, in a tiny town called Brandford. The house where you live in Brandford is not even a metaphorical island. It is not on a large plot of land or on a farm so remote that it may as well be in the middle of an ocean. Instead, the small three-roomed house sits alongside a row of others that look exactly the same.
The special prize they brought it in Brandford. They came with a big truck and then they just dumped this woman. We knew nothing about that because there were no newspaper by then in Brandford, unless you give somebody to bring you a newspaper from Bloemfontein. But the whites, they even tip their people who are working for them, their mates. Don't come near to that woman. It's very dangerous. Do not speak to that woman. It's a politique.
Your tiny house is in a township that local residents call Patagahle. It is one of almost 1,000 houses, little grayish-yellow boxes, one exactly like the other, all of them too small to hold the dreams of those inside them. On the walls of many of them, there are likely to be framed pictures with captions that say, "Black is beautiful," and framed photographs of loved ones and certificates and albums stuffed with memories.
I used to pass through Winnie's place getting to school. So you find that even if you don't greet Winnie, Winnie would greet you. She would stand in front of her house where she was dumped and say, "How do you leave people? Come here." And then you simply cannot run away when a person says, "Come here."
The restrictions of banishment mean you are not allowed to interact with people in groups. They are supposed to stay away, and only one person is allowed in the house with you at once. You never take it seriously.
The special friends, they were staying each and every night. Right up there is a hill, Bason Kop, right up there. They would stay there with their fruit kickers, looking at who is getting to Winnie's house and so on. No one should visit Winnie. She was not supposed to visit anyone. She was supposed to report at the police station at 6 o'clock every day, and she was not supposed to get to town. Hers was just restricted to be done in the house. Automatically, what they said you should not do, we would do it, as long as it is good for the blacks.
Well, I have lived most of my life alone. The best years of my life really have been those spent under burning orders. Exile here means virtually really being in prison at your own expense. And it is the extreme isolation that is very, very difficult. And of course, worst of all was being without my children and not having the opportunity to play the role of a parent, like all parents in democratic societies. Virtually both of us have really not had that opportunity to be parents to our children.
You are a woman who has learned to live without hope, a woman who has steeled herself against believing in the possibility of kindness, yet who simply can't help herself because hope is inherent in living. To give up on hope is to give up on possibility. And how can a freedom fighter lose hope?
So we used to have our meetings in church because we were now told we are no more supposed to get together. When he said, "No, Mama, what are the women doing here?" Then I told him. Then he said, "No, I think you must open a creche." Sure. In a township, small township like this, no one has been trained to run a creche here. No, I'll make a plan. She was very active with. Don't think it's going to take a week or what. 1, 2, 3, that. When he said no, just choose any women. I am going to send them in Soweto to go and observe how creche is being practiced. So as to come and do, you must do something, Mama. You must do something. That church, they were having a hall, and that hall was having a kitchen with a stove and full equipment. So those women, they allowed us to practice the soup kitchen there. The house that was burnt down, Winnie was practicing the clinic there. The medicines were from Chopek, from Dr. Motlane. So then it was bombed. She intended to build a garage and a storeroom to store the millime. So they bombed that. It was in the night. A special branch.
That is why even exile is so worthwhile, because I'm absolutely certain that we shall attain our liberation. And even being in exile really is a constant reminder of the sickness of our society, and that we are virtually in prison, even in our country. Those who are outside prison walls are simply in a bigger prison, because a black man is virtually a prisoner, and all those other fellow whites and other groups that are as oppressed as we are all really in prison, in a bigger apartheid prison.
In fact, she is a social worker by profession. And she practiced her social worker, her profession in Brantford freely because the people of Brantford would use Winnie. They used to call Winnie Mamani. If we are ill, even during the night, they would get to Mamani's place. Mamani. Mamani said, just get a driver. You take this woman or take this person to the doctor, free of charge. Each and everyone, if you are hungry, Winnie would give you food. You're getting cold, Winnie will bring you a blanket, will solve your problem you are having for. So the people were so fond of Winnie.
How can you fight so hard for justice, an act that requires nothing but hope, while protecting your heart from the vagaries of hope? You understand intimately the pain at the center of this paradox. Hope will save your people, but if you have too much of it, hope will kill your soul.
This is the first graduation of Tusano Daycare Center. That is the name of Winnie Mandela's crèche. The first one she established in Brantford, this one. This was a letter Winnie wrote in 1979, November, just wishing my family the best wishes because of giving her dark shoulder to lean against during those times, the bad times. Then she was just encouraging me, saying that I was the first one to come nearer to her.
Good morning, everybody. I would just like to acknowledge Nora. Thank you so much. Would you like to take a stand up and just take off your mask so people can see you and we can give you a hand? And also, I'd like to call on the filmmakers, Yumna Martin and Lesedi Mohwatle of Story Oracle. Come up. Just come and take this bow, yeah. And our cinematographer for that film is actually the photographer here today. She's hiding behind her mask. Thanks, Mamnoor. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gail Smith, and this has been an incredible dream assignment. I have been obsessed with Winnie Mandela since forever, and it is one of the most rewarding obsessions because it brings you into contact with the most amazing women, because only the crazies and the fabulous people are really as obsessed with Winnie as I am. So I'm really, really delightful. Has Sisonke joined us? Is she online? Oh, great. Okay, so I have oh, there we go. My other panelist is over here. I have the wonderful, wonderful pleasure of moderating this discussion with Sisonke Msimang, who you heard on the actual film, and we also have Keitumetsi Mutlatse. I'm mangling your surname. My apologies. And really, when we were discussing what we were going to do with the various panels, I had said to Lebo and Bongani that one of the things that people who want to undermine Winnie invariably say, oh, it was Brantford that broke her. It was Brantford that broke her. And in my research on Winnie, I had actually found that no, Winnie broke Brantford. She broke Brantford and she built Brantford. And really what we wanted to do was to get from our filmmakers a sense of Winnie's transformatory power and the ways in which she profoundly transformed it. And my job here today is just to moderate, not to speak. But I think that I'd love to speak all the time. But I just want to get from you, hey, Sisonke from Australia, how you doing? Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you're both here. But before we jump into it, I'm going to ask you briefly to just introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to ask you my first question. So I'll start with you, Ketumetse. Introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Okay, it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ketumetse Fatima Tsamotwatsi. I'm the chair and founder of Black Women Caucus, but today I wear my favorite hat, which is a social worker. I'm a feminist social worker. There is a lot of connection between the work I do in social justice and being a social worker, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ketumetse. Sisonke?
Sisonke Msimang, and I'm a writer. Wrote The Resurrection of Winnie Mandela.
Thank you. Okay, so Sisonke, were you able to see the film? Did you see the film that we just showed?
I couldn't hear it now, but I saw it a few days ago.
Okay, so you've seen. So I just wanted to ask both of you if you could just give us very, very briefly your response, your emotional response, intellectual response to the film. I'm going to start with Ketumetse and then come to you, Sisonke, because you're in the film. Ketumetse, you've just seen it. How did that land for you as a social worker or as a person?
Very befitting. Lovely to see the relationship between social justice, resistance, and social work. I just want to echo your sentiments about how we assume Winnie broke during that period, but it was so beautiful to see how she used her profession, her professional skills, to also push a very radical agenda, you know. So it was well curated, a lovely story, very emotive, you know, very emotive.
Thanks. Sisonke?
It was beautiful. Lesedi got an email from me saying, Lesedi! Wow, just beautiful. Absolutely stunning. Thoughtful. You know, as someone who has written about Mam Winnie, I had not, I think, done enough justice to her role as a social worker. I think seeing just that 10 minutes really made me to reflect on the politics of being a social worker in a way that I hadn't before. So that relationship between very practical assistance, being able to solve problems that people need right here and now, and then to be able to link that to a broader political strategy. Like, this is the thing that she is doing in Brantford, and she has free reign to do that in a way that I think she couldn't do in Soweto because she was linked to the hospital. And here she's linked to no one. She's linked to nothing. And so she does it in her own way, in a deeply political way, untethered from any institutional relationships. And I think that really hit me very powerfully in this film in a way that it hadn't hit me before.
Thank you. Yeah, when we were doing the program, you know, we really wanted to focus on social work and the fact that she used her social work in a very strategic and political way. Now, most people recognize Mandela's law profession as a tool to fight resistance, but when we speak about Winnie so often, the social work, and I always say that was a petri dish. They thought they were breaking and banishing the woman. They were sending her. Where else would a medical social worker thrive but a place like Brantford? So, Ketumetse, just talk us through a little bit about the history of social work and the relevance of Winnie specifically as the first black medical social worker. And what was social work about essentially in the sort of political economy of apartheid?
Whew, okay, great stuff. So I think it's really important to understand how social work comes about, right, at a global level. So social work kind of rises in the European countries after huge industrialization. So we were dealing with a contradiction of increased productivity, but that was existing alongside increased poverty. And so there was a need for, you know, women particularly to kind of aid those who were really not matching up to the economic man. And so social work starts off as a charity-driven activity, largely led by women. And then we see, as we move into the 1930s, where we see a formalizing and training of social work, right? But it's also during the 1930s where social work is introduced into South Africa, right? And when social work is introduced into South Africa, it's really meant to deal with this poor white community. You have all this privilege in the world, and you guys are just not matching up, right? And at that time, social work is largely influenced and driven by colonialism and imperialism, right? And when we look at the genesis and the history of social work, we see that we move from now, professionalizing social work to a more administrative role. So we need to almost write down and document impact, right? And that is a big concern that we still are seeing in the social work profession. But what becomes extremely important is how Winnie disrupts, the notion of the administrator in social work. So she brings into the spotlight the need for us to look at the political economy, social justice, and healthcare, right? But I think it's also important for us to note that during apartheid, and depending on what class line you sat on and what racial group you belonged to, that influenced how you defined the problem. So we would see, the white social workers and how they defined the problem of the poor white person, was really conservative in comparison to a more radical agenda that black social workers pursued. And when we look at the life of Winnie specifically, many people, we need to understand how the healthcare comes in. So as a social worker, anyone who's ever studied social work will tell you there's nothing as boring as the reports that we need to write, right? And the fun part in social work is when we get into the communities and engage. And so, like you said, many people, when we look and we locate the genesis of Winnie's political activism, we almost partner her with Mandela, right? It's almost like Mandela came and just opened her windows of resistance, and there she was. But in fact, Winnie's political journey started in social work during her practicals, right? Specifically in Alexandra and Soweto, where she was really interested in the rate of infant mortality, right? It is at that point where she was able to make the relationship between the political economy under the apartheid regime, access to healthcare, and also the fact that black kids were generally dying, right? But Winnie also used her opportunity when she had to go out, like anyone who's ever studied social work. She used that as an opportunity to go and conscientize, to build the understanding of what actually the problem was in the society. But we also know that, of course, like any powerhouse, we always want to nip it in the bud, right? When a woman, particularly a black woman, has that amount of power, we always want to nip it in the bud. But what Winnie does, and she reminds us as social practitioners, is that our job is far bigger than just handing out the food parcels and making sure people have eaten the door to door. But instead, at the heart of social work is to capacitate people. So I love when you spoke in the film to say that if you are to ever envision an alternative society, freedom, liberation, you must have hope. And Winnie thrived on hope. But I want to problematize something because
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that.
When we often think about Winnie, we think about her as the mother of the nation, right? And we also think about, and when we think about mothering and we come to social work, I often think that when we speak about social work as a mother's profession, it often depoliticizes the work that we do. So we automatically assume that women are just there we're just doing handouts. Like there's no critical thinking behind the work of social work and the skill set of social work. And so when we look at that and how Winnie was able to also, act against a narrative that was increasingly restrictive, but also kind of gave her her rise, is that we look now and say, when we speak about social work in the context of mothering, number one, in contemporary South Africa, we're depoliticizing, but we're also reinforcing a system that thrives on the othering of the care economy, right? Because social work forms part of the care economy, right? And this is why we see social workers in contemporary South Africa are still underpaid. We don't have any good resources because of the notion that we're just here to mother and there's no critical thinking behind it. So Winnie challenges us and says, it's not good enough to just write a report about how many families you've seen, about how many food parcels you've distributed. She's saying that in order for us to work towards an equitable and integrated society, we must be able to change and capacitate our people to do so effectively.
Whoa, thank you. Thank you. So, I thank you for bringing in the 1930s, because of course a lot of people don't know this, but Hendrik Verwoerd was not just the architect of apartheid. He was also the father of social work in South Africa. He was the chair of social work, the first chair of social work at Stellenbosch. So he was the father of social work. And he has an interesting parallel with Winnie in that Brandfort, his father was the NG Kerk church there. So Verwoerd spent his formative years in Brandfort. So him and Winnie have this interesting narrative, right, around social work and sociology. But anyway, that's just an aside. I want to come to you, Sisonke. The panel is looking very much at banishment. And it's interesting that Winnie speaks about her banishment as exile. I want you to just, how does that resonate for you as somebody who grew up in exile and who's written very, very beautifully about the experience of exile? How does Winnie's description of herself as being exiled resonate and land for you? And how do you feel about her sort of turning that banishment on its head by saying, I was actually exiled inside of my own country? So how did Winnie also resonate for you as a young woman in exile, seeing her essentially from afar?
Yeah, look, I think she's absolutely right. Banishment was simply another form of exile. And of course, hers was far more cruel and harsh than anything that I ever had to endure. Part of the function of exile, of course, was to separate people from the society. And this is why Brandfort fails spectacularly with Winnie Mandela. That just was never going to happen. She wasn't going to allow that to happen. And yet, of course, she understands it as a political strategy that is seeking to, diminish people's access to her. So I think where Brandfort is interesting is that while the community she has left behind can't access her, there is a new community that remains to this day incredibly loyal to her that she's able to forge. And so she challenges all of these ideas about tribalism. She challenges all these ideas about, whose allegiance will be to whom. She forges that in Brandfort by shifting entirely this notion that she's banished. And that's partly what I wanted, that struck me when I went to Brandfort myself. It struck me how ridiculously stupid apartheid was, because these bureaucrats thought that having her living side by side in a community, somehow that people would stay away from her, or that they would stay, or that she would stay away from them. It kind of boggles the mind that they thought it might work. So yeah, for me, banishment was, I think Brandfort is a great example of her, in some ways, her invincibility, her to be seen on other people's terms. There was so much that was said in the last response that I wanted to speak to, but let me stop here and I'll let you guide us, Gail.
Right, go on. Okay, Ketumetsi. Let's talk a bit about banishment, because it was definitely a strategy of the state, both the colonial state and the apartheid state. Talk to us a bit about banishment of black women as a specific strategy and the impact on black communities as a consequence.
When we think about banishment, when I close my eyes, I think about somebody throwing me into a dark corner, right? But when we think about institutional banishment, right, and systematic banishment, we realize that black women are still pretty much banished, right? There is the othering from decision making, from processes. Even in our resistance strategies during the apartheid era, we see that our strategies are brought into question, right? It almost feels like we can't be the custodians of freedom, right? Because ourselves, we are the face of non-freedom. And so when we think about banishment, I think it's very difficult for us to just reduce it to, instances like, the banishment of Winnie. But I think we also need to think about more of the structural banishment and how that also feeds into a larger inequality that we're still facing till today. But Winnie's case study becomes extremely important, right? And I'm going to come back to her role as a social worker, because there's something that I find very impressive, that she was deliberate about the principles of social work, right? And even in a supposed banishment, any social worker knows that you're on call 24/7. So even in the moments where she's castrated, where she is deemed, a no-go zone, she still remains truthful to the principles of capacitating communities, right? And I think that we should never take away from her. And history does a very good job. Let's be honest, guys, the patriarchal agenda was quite slick with that, right? And almost erasing her and her contributions. We know, just now reflecting on Frankfurt and looking at the ECD sector, right? The ECD sector in South Africa as a whole, is screaming genocide. We're literally killing young kids, young babies in this country. And for us to see Winnie make that linkage between infant mortality, the need for ECDs, and also liberation and equality is really important. And so, yes, banishment still exists. To some extent, we are still banished, but I think we must also be able to draw inspiration from Winnie. And I just maybe want to squeeze this in, and as a heads up to Tekano. There is a particular, and I learned this in my final year in social work actually, there's a particular methodology we use called narrative therapy. And when we're sitting here and everybody's speaking, I'm realizing that narrative therapy is one of the most effective forms of therapeutic interventions. And at the heart of narrative therapy is to tell stories. Because the most abused, the most disenfranchised people in society, when you give them the opportunity to tell their story, they're able to locate the freedom in their story. So even somebody who's being, who's a victim of any kind of violence, whether physical, sexual, or institutional, allow them to tell their stories, and you will be shocked at how you're able to capacitate them to be better.
Thank you. And that's really what we were trying to do with this program, was to give a new generation a chance to tell the stories that we've had a chance to tell. Sisonke, I just wanted to ask you, how, if anything, do you feel that you were transformed or changed by researching and writing about Winnie? I know that for me it's catalyzed quite a nervous breakdown, because after 3 years of non-stop and putting together in chronological order what was happening to her, and realizing she was caught up in a matrix of simultaneously oppressive hierarchies all the time, and they were all violent. How were you, if any, transformed by the process of writing about Winnie, and what was something that you learned about yourself in that process?
Hard question. Look, I think that the process of writing about her helped me to understand a little bit better this whole connection between strength and resilience. So she was incredibly strong for a very long time, and she was able to withstand this level of brutality that many of us just cannot imagine, on her own in a prison cell, banished, the kind of mind games and sexual objectification that she was subjected to by the regime, which constantly insisted that she was having affairs with this person, affairs with that one, and then the tabloids. Like at every step, she is subjected to all of this brutal masculinity. And she is able to transform that into something that pushes her agenda further. So none of this stops her. And I was struck by it. I was intimidated by it. I felt often as an author, you think you live with this person in a sense, right? And I was like, this Gogo is serious. And so I found that writing about her given what I began to understand about the effect of that realization, I felt that I needed and owed her care, so that I had to write about her with an added measure of care, precisely to counter what had happened both in her life, but importantly in the archive. So because what remains in the archive is partly her voice and her own incredible intellect, and so we're like some of that footage in the film, but a lot of what remains about her in the archive are these terrible articles, this way of seeing her, these interviews, like all of this stuff about her that continues the brutalization. And so the kind of afterlife of that brutality hardens, right? It becomes this huge weight of nastiness and meanness. And it's very hard to see her outside of that, particularly for a generation, unlike us, that wasn't able to experience her directly. And so as a biographer, what you're always thinking about this, and you would know this, Gail, what you're always thinking about is, how will this endure? What will happen in a century? What will happen in 2 centuries? What will the story be? What is the narrative going to be about this person? And so I needed to think about her and respond to her and write her into a place that was very full of care and love, and to protect her privacy was utmost for me. So yeah, it changed me in the way that I thought about the craft and what it is that you're doing when you are a feminist biographer.
Okay. Yeah, one of the big spiritual obstacles for me in writing this book, I just couldn't move, because I realized I was jumping over Evelyn Mandela. And Evelyn Mandela's spirit said, oh, no, you're not going to jump me. You have to come back and you have to know who I was in order to understand the man she married. And the relationship between Evelyn and Winnie was always something for me that fascinated me. And so just to speak to the care and the love, I had to understand Evelyn before I could make progress in terms of my own research and writing on Winnie, to understand the man that Winnie then essentially inherits from this woman, you know. But Ketumetsi, I wanted to come back to you and ask you, how, if anything, have you been transformed as a social worker by learning more? As we learn more and our history is unveiled, as you learn more about Winnie, how has it changed you? How has finding out more about her changed you and transformed your approach to social work?
I think I only learned about Winnie as a social worker in second year, and it made sense because I started my first year in Fees Must Fall. So I struggled. I really did, because I struggled with studying social work and being an activist, you know. And then she kind of gave me the rubber stamp to say, no, my child, continue, you know, because she also allowed me to think beyond this administrative rut that we're stuck in as a profession, to say that the real change requires us to move on all modes of intervention. So we're looking at the micro, the meso, the macro level. And in most cases, traditional social work is still very obsessed with the micro level, which is important. Yes, we need to do our casework, but there's something that's happening there, that upper structure that we're not dealing with, you know? And so Winnie was the affirmation that I needed, that it was okay to be angry, that it was okay to take risks. When I think about myself as a social worker today, I attribute my social work degree largely to the feminist movement in this country, because instead of completing my reports, I was on the streets zabalazaring, you know. It didn't always work in my favor. It didn't always work in my favor, but it was an important journey for me to go through, you know. And I think now, in retrospect, when I look, you know, at some point I hope to teach social work, but also to teach a social work that is not so popular. The one that says we need to go after the big guns. We need to be able to tackle issues of inequality. We need to find the sources and not always address the consequence, you know, because if we are to really change society, it must start there. But also, I think what Winnie, which is quite interesting, so this year we're celebrating her 85th birthday, and what is, and while preparing for this, I thought about Winnie's social work, the care economy, and it was quite interesting when we look at the response to the pandemic that the entire response has been solely dependent on the care economy, globally. And so this also reaffirms the need for the care economy, like social workers, to really strengthen their interventions, to be able to drive a society that we want to see for all.
Thank you. Now we've got 5 minutes, so 5 minutes left. And what I want you to ask you in wrapping up, whose shoulders do you stand on?
Ooh.
And why? And then I'll ask Sisonke. Sisonke's going to get a head start. She can think about her answer while you answer, Ketu. Let's see. Whose shoulders do you stand on, and why do you stand on their shoulders?
Sure. I stand on so many women's shoulders, but I think it was so interesting. The relationship we have with domestic workers is an untold love story in the country, right? And it also is an expression of the kind of sacrifices they've had to make to nurture some foreign family. I think about my mother, I think about my grandmother.
What are their names?
Queen Nzwaki Mutwatsi is my grandmother. Rowena Jane Kisintseng Chikwado is my mother. And often when I think about myself and all the many contradictions I hold and carry very proudly, by the way, I refer and I attribute it to these women in my life who have not always gotten it right, but they did their best. And I think that's really important, because part of writing history is to be able to deal with the complexities and the shortcomings of the women that we say multiplied, right? Because sometimes we multiply also with the toxic traits, And when we are multiplying, we must be able to say, hey, Mara leadership, more lenkare, mama, that corner, I don't think it really worked, and maybe I need to let go of that aspect of you. But I think I sit here as a woman, as a girl who was raised by a lady who owned a tavern for 21 years. I grew up in the most volatile cities in Johannesburg, but I'm a social worker, still ready to feed and to work for my country and to labor for it. And Mam Winnie is just an affirmation. She just basically says, Mukelet Amaya, you can do it.
Sisonke. Sisonke, whose shoulders do you stand on?
I mean, first and foremost, my mother, Dom Gulam Simang. I stand on the shoulders, of course, of my own grandmother, Sisonke Msimang. There was a generation of women, my grandmother and her sisters, Bogogo, were called wild horses. That's what they called them, because they had children in any which way they felt like it. They had husbands, then they kipitad for a while, then they married somebody. They just did their thing in defiance of what people always say are the expectations of African women. A few weeks ago, Ola was doing this fantastic conversation, and she talked this idea that people often say, well, where are the feminists? Where are the African feminists? And they will say that to us as they speak to us, looking at us. This kind of erasure is so profound. And I think what we also do is we look backwards and we erase not just women, but we erase defiance. So the defiance is everywhere. There's evidence. These women who lived singular, spectacular, idiosyncratic lives and who did all kinds of stuff. And yet somehow when we remember them, we rub out those bits and they become Gogo who sat on the mattresses and were like this. And we know from the stories that remain of them that that's not what they were doing. That's not how they were living. That's not how these children, who we are, came about. So I stand on the shoulders of troublesome, misfit, women. But also I stand on the shoulders, it sounds backwards, I don't know how to describe it, but I stand on the shoulders of this generation of young women, the fallists, who really energize feminism and who have taken direct action when our generation, we fought, we've done some things, but I think we fell into a trap of bureaucracy. We believed that we could feminize the state. And these guys are another kind of inspiration to me. So I don't think that the thing of being a feminist is ever over. I think I stand on the feminists of the shoulders of those who've come before. I very much stand on the shoulders of those who are standing right here alongside of us. And I learned so much from younger feminists. I am constantly in awe of their wisdom.
Thank you both. I mean, I could sit here and talk all day and hog the limelight, but I just want to thank you so much, both of you. I mean, I was raised 15 kilometers from Winnie Mandela, and one of the things that there are many things that attracted me to her, but the fact that she was a single mom of 2 kids like my mom. And I think when you grow up and you watch your mother walk alone without a man through patriarchy, when you see a woman move through patriarchy without a man by her side, you understand what patriarchy is in its most nuanced form. And that for me was always the hook. I would look at this lady on television who was a terrorist with her 2 little girls and think, but she's like Mommy Mark and me, you know? And I think that it was the way in which she walked so fearlessly through patriarchy on her own with her 2 children, that as a young colored girl, I looked at this woman and I was just immediately fascinated by her. And I stand on my mother's shoulders, Shirley Elizabeth Smith. She was a formidable woman, and also she was a teacher. And through generations of teaching, the caring profession, not particularly political, but very, very, very insightful. So thank you so much, both of you, for being part of this. I mean, we could go on forever, but Trayvon's going to have my head. So I'm going to have to stop now. Sisonke, thank you. Kate Metsi, thank you. Thank you.
Think we did well?
Cool. Thank you so much, Ketumetse, Gail, and Sisonke. There's so many little nuggets that I'm taking from all of these conversations, and I think from the past one, it's this idea of locating freedom in telling our stories, and of the importance of telling all stories, whether of others or ourselves, with care and love, which I think is something so resonant today. And now I take us in another direction, one of a storyteller themselves, as I introduce a poet who will be speaking to us via video link. Lebogang Masango is a PhD candidate. She holds a master's in social anthropology from WITS, but she is also an award-winning writer and poet and author of the book Mpumi's Magical Bees, which is translated into all 11 official languages. She joins us now to perform a commissioned poem that is called We Are Women.
We women. What would we be if not for the wisdom of grandmother's hands? Her age folds of skin hold secrets, prayers edged tightly into crow's feet, back bent because she survived the worst of what humanity can be. But the warmth of her body, hugs that know you, and all the women you have been, you, her, your mother, your great-grandmother, all are present in the room every time you get together. You, daughter, make your whole bloodline smile. Every time you step out into the world and conquer everything, from doubt to dark days to difficult degrees. Just being you is enough, alive and living honestly. You are their pride, their gem, their first of many. And if nothing else, we women are the first women to keep surviving a global catastrophe. Between the climate crisis and the pandemic, to keep going against the gravity of grief is nothing short of epic. It just is, even though it shouldn't at all be. We women are always first to get up. We wake the day, confront cold snaps and frozen dew, prepare families' baths and breakfasts before work and school. We women are the silent street sweepers with black plastics tucked in pockets, swishing some kind of cleanliness into city streets, disappear at dawn, and like we were never there, return to even more rubbish heaps. We women put in work, fruit and veg and stock sweets selling, hair braiding, ever entrepreneurial and enterprising, cause this whole family's got to eat. From this horizon to that horizon, we women make houses into homes out of little more than 2 fish and 5 loaves. We women raise communities with our bare hands, bear the bridges of our backs to get everyone over to promised lands. We women have been first. First to be misnamed, misplaced, and disgraced, violated. They mistake us for rock, unbruised boulder. But bless our ancestors who summoned all their strength to let the world know that spirit is made of something more solid. Bless their journey, bless their hearts, bless their feet. 20,000 strong to Pretoria they marched for you and me. Bless our ancestors, like Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, whose fist gripped the sharp edge of the spear of the nation in times of trouble and triumph, tear gas and trials, kept that fist clenched and raised towards the sky through beatings, betrayals, and brutality. She mobilized, she mothered, she marched on to give all of us, her daughters, a light to look up to and see. So we women stand on the precipice of our individual destinies. We know that what makes us great is being part of an unbreakable chain of women who have survived, lived and thrived through erasure, violence and forced silence, kept community close as that bridge to get over to the other side. We take our place as every generation before us has done. We whisper to the future, the best is not yet still to come. We are the here and the now of it. The best and most brilliant to ever do it, the gold and glory of all of it. We working women, we waiting women, we weeping women, we winning women, we wonder women.
What power! I find myself so moved almost to tears from that poem. Thank you so much for your care, your attentiveness in this time. We'll now take a comfort break where you can stretch your legs and get some tea, and we'll return here at 11:25. Thank you, everyone.
just can't let you go.
point in blaming you, you did not know. Oh, I thought you were